Well, I'm delighted that we are currently being joined by Misha Sher, who is the worldwide Vice President, Sports and Entertainment at MediaCom. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us today.
It's my pleasure.
Now, what we'd like to do is sort of talk a little bit about the importance of, digital and marketing and sports and entertainment, and how those two things can be allied together. So essentially, we've come up with a few questions, and hopefully you can explain to us what we don't know and tell us some new things. So let's just start at the beginning. With so many advertising platforms open to clients at the moment, why should people look at sports sponsorship?
Yeah. Well, sports sponsorship is quite unique. I guess it's in and of itself, it's not a marketing channel like any other advertising channels. But it's a very powerful brand communication platform that can be brought to life across a broad range of consumer touch points. And the way that sponsorship achieves this, and what makes it so unique, is that when you place a brand at the intersection between consumers and the things that they love, you've got something quite unique there. Ultimately, we're living in a world where we are inundated with advertising, and there's so much demand for our time. So the ability to get into that environment and become part of the experience, uninterrupted experience, is very, very unique. And that's what sponsorship, when executed properly, allows you to do. So and what it does and what it delivers, unlike any other advertising platform, is this sort of type of sustained, meaningful, and more importantly, sort of valuable engagement that other channels struggle to provide.
What's the return on investment in sports sponsorship?
Look, it's I think ultimately it comes down to the areas against which any particular brand chooses to activate, or what they're trying to get out of it. So there is no such thing as here's a return on investment. It's about what it is that you're trying to achieve in the process that you have in place to activate against that, and measure it. So if you're trying to go from no awareness to to an awareness that's 20% higher, then that's the measure. That's your return on investment. If you're looking to use sponsorship to drive sales, then you measure the difference in which it impacted sales. I think the difficulty when it comes to ROI is that a lot of clients, one, don't activate very well, and two, and even fewer are actually measuring what they're doing. So if you don't know at the start what you're trying to do and what you're going to measure, then it's very difficult to establish what is the return for what you invested.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of or let us know what, in your opinion, are some of the key emerging trends in sport, and how can clubs capitalize on those and take advantage of what they need to be doing to get out there and best utilize what they've got to offer?
Sure. Well, there are quite a few, and I think a lot of these trends have been accelerated by what's gone on over the course of the past 12 months. We've had more change in the past 12 months than probably in the past 40, 50 years, in terms of what the industry is doing. So I suppose some of those changes, or some of those emerging trends, I would say, are as follows. One is there's clearly a move to have more connection to purpose, from companies to people to clubs. So this idea that there's this idea that it's about selling product, or it's about reaching eyeballs and driving revenue. I think those things have to go. You have to they're still important, but ultimately, I think you have to lead with purpose. You have to stand for something. I think everyone in the world, from Unilevers to Manchester United and everyone else, has to reevaluate their role, rethink their role in society and the impact that they can make in society, because I think a lot of that has been elevated over the past 12 months. I think there's definitely a trend to redefine the relationship with fans now that obviously for the last 12 months and for foreseeable future, fans are not going to be back in venues, whichever venues those are. And even when they do come back, it's probably going to be in reduced capacity. So this has accelerated the need to connect with people wherever, your fans, wherever they are, and build an engagement without having these people engage with you physically on an ongoing basis. So which brings me to the next point, which is the evolution in digital and the acceleration of digital, right? So we're seeing a huge shift in technological and digital innovation, new technologies coming to market, and a real focus on how you build a digital ecosystem that can sustain your growth, and more importantly sustain your relationship with fans. Couple other big trends. I mean, gaming has become a very much sort of validated entertainment genre in the mainstream. I think that was already happening, but again, over the course of the 12 months, I think what we're seeing is it's very much mainstream. We're looking at the numbers of people whether competing or just casually gaming. More and more people are gaming as a pastime, as entertainment. It's now bigger than music and film industries combined. So you can't ignore gaming and how you exist in that, in the world where it's so big. You just can't ignore it. The other trend we noticed over the past 12 months is the way in which talent and athletes have been elevated. We've seen this happen over the years, that you have all these individuals who are now, because of media, social media, this intermediated the relationship between talent and fans. So and over the course of during the pandemic, a lot of these athletes have had the opportunity to build a much closer relationship with their fans, because they've been at home, and many of them have used that opportunity to nurture that relationship. And also in the cases of in the case of someone like Marcus Rashford, have shown that they have they can transcend into culture and can become a voice for something positive. So that, again, I think if we were sort of 24 months ago talking about, well, that's a footballer, that's a cricketer, and all they need to worry about is playing sport, I think the expectation now, when you see what players have done, what athletes have done, is that you use your profile and you use your platform for good, which wherever that happens to be. And maybe one last trend that's worth mentioning is the increased importance of creating experiences for the fans, whether that's, I guess, for the time being it won't be on site, but certainly off site. This idea of how can you create something in the digital space where they're now using technologies to bring people together, have them still experience camaraderie and sort of connection to other fans and to the club going forward. So I think those are, for me, those would be some of the top trends that I noticed over the course of the past 12 months.
Obviously, the last 12 months have been, unprecedented, I think is the watchword and the glamorous way of putting it at the moment. But during the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in, industry's digital journey and sport content being broadcast other than on mainstream television with live streaming and OTT and things like that. Do you see that continuing to develop?
Yeah, not only just that continuing. I think that's that is only going to continue to accelerate. That's the future, whether that's sort of digital or artificial, AI or augmented reality, virtual reality. All of these are an opportunity for whether that's athletes or sports federations or clubs. Provides them an opportunity to leverage that to create, to connect with people, but also to create, new types of experiences, new types of revenue streams. So that, this is, whereas it used to be something that was perhaps a nice to have, and some organizations were more developed than others. Going forward, unless you're very sophisticated in the digital space, you just won't be able to survive.
Obviously, this, the landscape has changed. Has that changed, do you think, what commercial partners are looking for now in this digital space, and how can clubs or the sports industry best monetize these new opportunities? Or is it going about and trying to discover what these new opportunities are?
A good question. I mean, look, I think it would make sense, and I've been advising a lot of rights holders on this. I think it makes sense for the organizations to go back to the drawing board and say, right, we can't, in 2021, we cannot go out to market and talk the same way and present the same types of opportunities that we did, even 12 months ago. We're in a different world. With different needs, with different expectations, with different types of competition. You've got who you might have thought were your competitors 12 months ago is that's a completely different space now. You may be up against a rugby club down the road, and now you are competing against an esports team that wasn't there. So, or an in-game integration or something like that on Twitch. I mean, these things are real. I think there are two things, I suppose. One is, each club needs to have a really hard look at, at its story, what it's saying, how it's coming across. Again, coming out of pandemic, I think the purpose to be at its heart. I think what sponsors and organizations are looking for are really sort of forward-thinking organizations that they want to align with, that that they know where they come from, but more importantly, they know where they're going. But the most important aspect of this is really evaluating the entire sort of digital ecosystem of a federation or a club or a league, and making sure that it's fit for purpose going forward. So it may have done the job 12-18 months ago, but going forward, what do you need to have to be able to drive the ongoing engagement with fans? What do you need to have for ongoing value in the digital space to your partners? How can you create new types of revenue streams given all the new technology that's coming online that wasn't there before? So I think this audit has to be done by everyone to identify exactly where there are areas to grow, and the priority should be made on the investments in those particular areas.
Obviously, we've talked about the advertising landscape and the world of sport being completely different to how it was 12 months ago. What are a couple of the best examples that you've seen of sports organisations, clubs, teams developing and adapting to the situation that we find ourselves in now? Other than Somerset Cricket Club, obviously.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you've seen some, we've seen some examples in recent times. For instance, in football, where clubs are going out and developing, large scale relationships around, let's say, sustainability. They're creating categories that didn't exist before, or were seen as something that, we can do this in the community and so on. Now it's becoming a separate category. Now it starts to appeal to a lot of the organizations that perhaps might not have been attracted to a particular football club before. I think Arsenal have done a deal in that space. I believe Liverpool have as well. So I think that's an interesting trend, and that will continue. You go speak to any Fortune 500 CMO, and they'll tell you that purpose is at the heart of everything that they're doing, because they know ultimately it translates to sales for them. So that's one interesting area that perhaps we haven't seen as much in the past, but we're definitely seeing a lot more of that now. Mm-hmm. Whether that's on sustainability or other environment linked agenda. Another interesting development is on, and we will see a lot more of this, but we just saw this recently, is on shorter term partnerships that are around sort of content and digital. This, like, the idea that you need to come on board and you have to spend X amount of money and you have to sign up for 3 or 4 years. Okay, there are still going to be partners that are interested in that, but I think increasingly there will be many opportunities for sports organizations to develop shorter term. That what we've seen. Hasbro just did a really interesting campaign around Christmas time with Chelsea and Arsenal. So it was, if you would have looked at it in the past, the clubs probably wouldn't have considered doing something that's short term, and they in effect would have been leaving money on the table. But you would have had a client like Hasbro that would have gone somewhere else, would have spent that money on, maybe on Facebook or another media owner. So I think what we're seeing is there is a behavioral change that sports organizations are starting to see themselves as media owners, as much as they are, I suppose, a sports organization. So those are just a couple of examples.
Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone or a company or an organization who are looking to invest their money in the direction of a sports club in 2021?
Look, I think the advice I always give is make sure it's a space or property that obviously aligns well with what you're doing, but more importantly, gives you the opportunity to bring something to the audience. I think the future of partnerships is all about, not about eyeballs and maximizing eyeballs, but it's all about what you actually do when you're there. It's about becoming part of people's lives, part of the experience. So the question I would always ask is, okay, well, you're going to go into this space and you're going to get some branding. So what? There could be many other partners, but other team partners, club that are going to be seen in that context. It's very difficult to rely on that. So if you try to identify some white space, an area, whatever that happens, cricket, football, Formula One, whatever it happens to be, but make sure you have a real reason for being there, and you can add, you can bring something that would serve the community ultimately, because I think the future of partnerships is evaluating them on the basis of, whether or not there's an opportunity to create something that's greater than some of its parts.
You mentioned obviously Formula One and football there, and sponsors just roll off the tongue when you think of those two particular sort of global phenomena, if you like. How can cricket sort of best position itself to be more successful and more high profile from a sponsorship point of view, do you think?
Look, I think I'm not sure that's look, clearly football and Formula One have certain attributes that are unique to them. It's a very, it's high profile, it's global, it's always on in the case of football. I think cricket doesn't need to necessarily compete. It doesn't need to compete with football for a while, because actually I think what it offers and the audiences that it has are different. Certainly cricket audiences are mostly different to the football audience. I think cricket needs to look at what it has and what's unique to the game and to the and start with the audience. And I think you've got, cricket has a premium audience, for instance, compared to football. So the types of, that means the types of companies that you would attract are different, and should be different than the types of companies that that would be attracted to football. It's a different, it's a different sport, it's a different demographic, it's a different kind of experience. I think it's important to elevate that. You can't really compete with football on scale. You can't really compete with a lot of those things, but actually you don't need to, because also if I was in cricket, I would say, look, you could be in football and you could be spending £1 million in football, but what does that get you in football, for example, right? How much do you have to spend to get a share of voice in football, and how much do you then have to spend over and above that to sort of, to try again to keep yourself visible and relevant. I would imagine that in cricket you don't have that, or you don't have that to the same degree, right? So it's more premium, it's less cluttered, and I think the opportunity to engage ultimately and connect with the key customers for these brands is quite powerful in cricket. Don't forget that most of the companies are not interested in speaking to as many people as they want. They want to speak to a very specific audience. They want to say specific things. So long as you can make that very clear, you can articulate who that audience is, have the infrastructure in place to provide that kind of storytelling and engagement. I think would be the way to go for cricket.
Okay. I'm conscious that our time together is now sort of drawing to a close.
It's okay. That's fine. I got a few more minutes, no problem.
Thank you very much. I just thought you touched on it in the opening question, but I'm a local company, or maybe a national company. I've got some money in the advertising budget for 2021. Why am I choosing sports, in particular cricket, ahead of radio, print, television? Why am I going to go down that route?
I think I've said in the beginning, the power of being a part of something that people are emotionally invested in is very, very powerful. But beyond that, today it's all about the question every company out there needs to ask themselves is, am I culturally relevant? And advertising and traditional sort of radio adverts, putting spots, doesn't make you culturally relevant. What makes you culturally relevant is finding a way to infiltrate culture and become part of the conversation. So, and then you can't do that through radio, and you can't do that through television. You can't do that through many other channels. You can do that by being part of, being part of an experience for like cricket, like football, or something else that people are deeply passionate about. But it's about, ultimately it's about what you do when you're there. It's about how you use that, how you leverage, so not use it, but how do you leverage that to enhance the experience of people in that environment, and become part of their conversation.
Just finally, do you think that there's as much value in sports advertising with there being limited crowds in stadia potentially over the next sort of few months?
Sorry, I missed that first part of it. Sorry.
Do you think there is still as much value in sports advertising if stadia are closed to fans, or there's a reduced capacity for the main events themselves, or is it down to the clubs to make sure that they do increase the offering or create new value, if you like, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in?
Yeah. No, like that depends on. Yeah, I think that depends on. Really depends on the property. You saw the. The Premier League, for example, at the moment draws huge numbers despite despite the pandemic, right? Because people, it's clear that people are desperate for things that they haven't had for many months, right? So for watching their teams, for being together, for having emotions that they haven't had. So the value of that hasn't gone away. But what has happened is in the absence of I guess people going to stadiums, now companies have a choice and saying, right, well, do I then look at fewer, bigger, better? I mean, whereas I know I want to be around cultural moments and events that matter to people, but who is going to give me who out there gives me the ability to do that? So it's about staying, for sports organizations, whether that's cricket or otherwise, it's about demonstrating that despite the fact that people can't get into the ground, they offer they still have very engaged audience. They still have a way to connect. There's still ways for partners to execute effectively by working with them. Look, I actually think that the value of sport is going to increase when we come back, because I think it's reminded us just how much that it's not just a nice to have or a hobby. It's a huge fabric of our society, and that's not going to change. People aren't just going to stop going or playing, or they'll continue to play video games. They'll want to go back and watch cricket. They're going to want to go back, be amongst their friends, and watch a game of football. So it will come down to, in the immediate term, how effective can you be in offering partners a solution so that they'll go somewhere else.
Just finally, you touched on it there. How do you see the relationship between sports clubs and their supporters, but also their commercial partners, developing in the post-COVID world, whenever that might be?
Yeah. Look, I think it's going to be largely driven again technology, content, and everything everything in the digital space. I mean, what we're seeing is even people will still want to obviously come to the come to the stadium and come to the ground to watch cricket, but ultimately it's about what the key is going to be. How are you going to maintain what infrastructure do you have in place to maintain that sort of ongoing connection and engagement with your fan base outside of the times that they are there? So because now that this whole sort of digital acceleration has taken place, there's so much more demand on people's time. There's so many things that they could be doing when they're not with you. So the question is, do you have the the infrastructure that's in social and digital to connect with them, and then how well do you leverage that, and how engaged are people with you outside of the match days, which are only once a week or once every couple of weeks, depending on the sport. So sponsors are going to want to, when they're coming in, they will want to know what that looks like for you. Your fans will expect you to be, to provide ongoing, engaging content for them to stay connected. So they will choose that as opposed to something else that's competing for their time. So that's the world that we're in. We're in that kind of competition. We're competing for people's time. We're operating a attention economy. Right, and that's how you have to look at it. That's how every sports organization has to look at the challenge. How are we going to win in the economy? So, and 12 months ago, someone was a fan, and they will just continue to be a fan, and they'll give you their time because they won't.
So I guess as well, some of these practices that we've had to develop because they've been forced upon us can now be used to benefit both the club and its supporters, I guess. Are you still there?
Hello? Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Sorry.
So just saying that, on the back of your response there, a lot of clubs are going to find themselves in a position where these practices that they've developed over the last 12 months, because they've been forced upon them, are now going to be utilizing those as an effective tool moving forward.
No, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been forced into it in some ways, right? I mean, the ones that haven't perhaps been on that journey or were in that journey and were going to perhaps take longer than they had originally planned. But there is no, but it's very, very competitive. Like the competition, when we talk about, you asked earlier about, what are brands looking for when they're looking at sport. A lot of companies are not necessarily looking at sport. That's not the question anymore, right? The question is, what can we be doing in culture? Because they know that there are other ways. That sport isn't really the only way now into culture. I mean, of course, it didn't used to be either, but that there are other ways in which they can. And even if when it comes to sport, maybe they'll choose, rather than sponsoring a team or a club, they might just go and start creating original content with talent, because they know that's another app now. The talent is media. So you're competing against talent now. So I think there is a lot. It's a very competitive. It's a very competitive space. You have to realize that you are competing as much with talent in Fortnite as you are with another sports team in this down the road or around this country.
Well, brilliantly put. And Misha Sher, Worldwide Vice President of Sports and Entertainment and Mediacom, really appreciate you talking to us today and taking the time to enlighten us a little bit.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.